Hey guys, how you doing today? I got a crazy story for you guys this time around. If you like stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. And I definitely love telling stories just from any range of subjects. So if you leave down in the comments below of a story you're interested in, I'll probably research it, and who knows, it might be my next video. Without further ado though, let's get right into this. So our story actually begins today in Mississippi, which in the 1960s was actually the most segregated state. So two civil rights activists would actually travel all the way down from New York, named Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner, because they were going down there that summer. They were going to meet with another local civil rights activist, James Chaney, who had been fighting for the black community to have the right to vote without living in fear. The three would meet up, and they would actually hold a rally or two. It would be pretty successful, but it was only a matter of time before James Chaney would tell them about the disturbing things happening around Nebasha County at the time, where churches were being burned all over the county. And they actually had a pretty sinister suspicion about these church burnings because Nebasha County actually had a really dark secret. Well, pretty much Mississippi in the 1960s as a whole had a pretty dark secret. It had the highest membership and influence of the Ku Klux Klan at this time, and they would pretty much oppose their ideology on anybody. So it wasn't really quite a mystery that black churches all over the county were being burned out, especially because a lot of these churches were actually speaking out on civil rights. So the three men, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, would all go to investigate a pretty recent church being burned down. And it probably didn't take them very long to conclude what happened, but unfortunately, the Nebasha County Police were actually scouting out the place. So the three were jailed on bogus charges, and all of them were hauled off to the local police station. And like I said, the Klan had a lot of influence in this area. So unfortunately, this meant that even police officers held membership within the Klan. Because the man who arrested them, his name was Cecil Price, and he actually was a high-ranking leader within the hate group. The police would hold the three for several hours with no phone call before they would be released around 10 p.m., never to be seen again. And this was highly suspicious to the black community in Nebasha County. This wasn't actually the first incident of something happening like this, so they definitely wanted the Nebasha County Police to make an inquiry about what happened to these three men. And we all know the local police were pretty corrupt, so they didn't really do the best investigation into it, obviously, and the story gained countrywide attention. And this meant that the FBI was going to get involved, and they led a massive search effort for the three activists. There was no sign of the men, and the local people, they were actually pretty sympathetic towards the hate group in the area, and kind of had a pretty similar ideology, so they really weren't giving them much. FBI would issue a statement that they assumed that the three men were dead, and this just increased the tension in the area. That summer, there was numerous burnings and bombings of local black churches, and this was just really a dark time for people. Violence only seemed to intensify day after day, and when these three activists went missing, this was pretty much just the last straw for the black community. FBI would actually find the car that belonged to them. It was burnt out in a bush somewhere, but that was pretty much their only lead, and aside from that, they were just at a dead end. Getting extremely frustrated with this case. They seen the sheriff Cecil Price, who was their prime suspect, just marching around town like basically a hero. The case would just get colder and colder, and they just got desperate, leading them to make a call back up to New York. Because back in New York, they had an informant or a connection, whatever you want to call him, who was pretty much the deadliest hitman for the Italian mob at the time. He was an enforcer for the Colombo family at the time, and he'd actually become an informant for the FBI in the early 1950s, where he was actually implicated in a bank robbery, and pretty much just got involved with them not to go to prison, I'm assuming. It was actually a really lucrative partnership for the FBI in this mob hitman. He would actually kind of use them for information on the streets, and then he'd give them information back. So it was kind of like a give and take relationship. The best part about it is nobody was going to suspect this cold-blooded gangster for being an informant. His name was Gregory Scarpa, and if you know a lot about Cosa Nostra and its history, you'll know he was probably one of the most feared men on the streets of New York City from 1960 up until 1990. He'd later go on to be called the Grim Reaper, so that's a pretty good indication of what kind of guy he was. You'd be surprised. Apparently, his wife Linda Shiro said he loved having this relationship with the FBI. He felt like he was untouchable on the streets. Like I said, if anyone crossed his path, he would just sell them out and get them arrested. Or there's even stories of him getting information from the police for him to commit hits. And remember, at this time, the FBI actually didn't even admit to the public that the Italian mob existed. So this was pretty much just like the perfect connection for them to have. The FBI would get in contact with Scarpa, where he'd drive all the way down to Mississippi and meet one of the agents at a motel there. They'd hand him a bag with 30 grand in it and hand him a pistol, and he was pretty much ready to hit the streets of Nebasha County. Like I said before, the FBI was extremely frustrated with the case, so they could pretty much give two shits what this guy did. Scarpa was given a list of leads from the FBI, and basically through intimidation and other tactics, he would narrow it down to one man. A local TV salesman named Lawrence Bride. And one of Greg's most deadly skills, or just attributes, I'd say, he was actually extremely charismatic. So he would really fool you into thinking he's this really friendly, upbeat guy or whatever. And once he'd get you alone, it was basically go time. This is exactly what he would end up doing with Bride. He'd go into his store, he'd charm him up. He'd end up buying a TV from him, and then when Bride was helping him walk the TV out to his car, he pulled a gun on him and basically said, "Get in the car or you're done." Bride was taken out into somewhere in the middle of the woods late at night, and pretty much Greg went into him at that point. I'm not going to go too into what he did, but he pretty much started by shoving his gun down his throat and intimidating him, and then pretty much proceeded to just beat him for hours on end. And this is pretty much all it took. Bride would admit that the KKK did kill these men. He would also admit where these men's bodies were dumped. Pretty much the whole shebang. The FBI just needed to make a call up to New York. Scarpa drove up, and that was the end of the story. Except it wasn't the end of the story for Gregory Scarpa's and the FBI's relationship to go on and flourish from on this point. Greg would go back to New York City, and now he literally was pretty much untouchable. He did a solid for the FBI, and they weren't going to forget it. Saddest part about it is I'd like to say that at least some good came from it, that they were able to find out what happened to these men, but nobody was actually ever charged for the murders of these three activists. Cecil Price and a couple other men would be implicated in some other charges, but like I said, nobody was actually charged with first-degree murder of any of them. The black community within Mississippi was still being targeted by hatred. The civil rights movement would lose key leaders like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and in the end of the day, this pretty much only benefited Gregory Scarpa, which, if you get down to it, was pretty much just a serial killer. It would expose how widespread the Klan was in Mississippi, and over time their influence would begin to fizzle out. But it is pretty sad that they never ended up charging with anybody with the murders of these three men, because in the end of the day, they were just speaking about equality and rights for black people, and they pretty much just wanted to make the world a better place. So it is pretty sad that they never were able to find justice for these guys. And apparently, the FBI would actually go on to use Gregory Scarpa again, because in 1966, in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, another local activist would be killed when somebody rolled up to his car and whipped a Molotov cocktail into it. His name was Vernon Dahmer, and this was another case that gained widespread attention. Gregory Scarpa is actually listed in the FBI files for this case as a sort of associate, or whatever they want to call him. But they would actually cut ties with him after this case, disputing the effectiveness of his role in it. They would take him back pretty much like 5 years later. So his relationship with the FBI was a really long-standing one. It pretty much lasted his entire career as a mobster, which was a long and extremely horrific reign that Greg Scarpa had on the streets of New York City. And I hope this story doesn't actually embellish or make me seem like I'm trying to make Greg look like a good guy, because he was actually a really, really horrible person, to be honest. Within the Italian mob, Cosa Nostra, they actually do have a set of rules, believe it or not. And one of them is not killing innocent people, and Gregory Scarpa was pretty much notorious for doing this. After him and his men put the fear of God into a teenage girl one time, he pretty much hugged her and consoled her and was like, "We're not going to do anything to you, don't worry." And as soon as he released from the hug, he shot her in the head. So he was an extremely ruthless guy, and it's pretty surprising to learn about his long-standing relationship with the FBI. There is actually quite a bit of conflicting evidence with these stories, but what is weird is you can even find that Gregory Scarpa might have been even involved with investigations going on in Mississippi as early as 1963. With the biggest piece of evidence to discredit these stories coming from Jay Cochran, who was a FBI agent who was present when they were digging up the bodies of the three activists. And he said there's pretty much no merit to this story, and he never seen Scarpa around at the time. But if you're going to have somebody like this on your payroll, I don't think you would really want to admit to, that you're linked to a serial killer and a mob enforcer. So I would have to conclude that I think all these stories have some truth to them. The one happening in 1967 with Vernon Dahmer is 100% confirmed. He's literally in the FBI's records of this case. So Gregory Scarpa did at some point go down to Mississippi, but the information is a little chalky, especially because this story's kind of like an urban legend or almost like a myth at this point. But there is a lot of truth to it. And I would say that he might have even been involved in all three of these investigations, the one in 1963, the one in 64, and 1967. But like I was saying, 100% he was involved in the one with Vernon Dahmer in 1967. Gregory Scarpa would go on to pass away in 1994 from complications with AIDS. And it's kind of really ironic because I would say the only saving grace that would make him look like a good person was him doing these things down in Mississippi in the 1960s. But it was actually his own racism and bigotry that would end up to his demise. He needed to get a blood infusion, and he, like I said, was quite a bigot, so he believed that the black community was the cause of AIDS in America at the time. So he asked his crew for everybody to donate blood, and one of them had the virus, and he ended up catching it, and that led to his death. He does have a really interesting story though, so if you guys really like this video and wanted me to go deeper into Greg's story, leave it in the comments down below, or just any ideas for videos or any topics that you would want me to cover, because like I said, I love telling a wide variety of any type of stories. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. I know I enjoyed researching and making it for you guys. So don't forget to like and subscribe. And, just take it easy, and I'll catch you guys next time. Have a good one. Peace.